So, for the first time, gold has overtaken US Treasuries by value and recently surpassed the euro to become the leading global reserve asset. I read this and it sounds like shocking news, but I'm not really surprised given the policies the US has been enacting for the past 50 odd years. Let's dive into these two articles from Yahoo Finance that really go into not necessarily the death of the dollar, but the slow decline of the dollar and how it's been overtaken by other reserve assets in this new monetary world. So this is the first article that I'm really reading about this that covers it in depthly from a survey point of view, and it shows that for the first time, more central banks are set to shrink dollar holdings. The survey was carried out by the official monetary and financial institution forums, and this apparently is a London-based think tank set up in 2010. So, among the 90 central banks and public pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, it also found a significant increase in the use of AI from current levels. I'm not sure what that has to do with the dollar being the reserve currency, but let's just dive into this. So, the survey participants who collectively oversee some 10 trillion in assets, that's literally just that's literally just BlackRock only. So I don't know. Increasingly, I don't know how accurate this would be, but it's still a lot. 90 central banks increasingly viewed volatility as a permanent feature and are testing new approaches to dealing with it, including applying AI to the problem. So the old assumption that public investors can wait for the environment to normalize looks increasingly unrealistic. And this is, I think, the new world order that we're seeing from COVID, whereby we waited, 2 to 3 years for COVID to settle down, and then it just continued to other conflicts and other crises continue to overlap, and it's increasingly just not possible, not practical. Let me say, not practical to wait for the economy to revert to its normal tendencies. It's pre-COVID era. So we're living in a new era, and it seems that central banks are aligning themselves to this. So even though gold has been increasing in value, there's still no clear alternative to the dollar. It still holds the reserve currency basis. But what we're seeing now is that there's a slow shift, and that's the thing that really interests me, because the notion that it will just drop off one day is not really possible. It's more of what they say, that it took centuries to build Rome, but it also took centuries for Rome to fall. 79% of central banks and 60% of public funds believe that the global monetary system is transitioning to a multipolar world. So instead of there being one major reserve currency at the top, like the dollar, we'll probably have very many competing currencies. Yeah, sort of like a oligopoly, they say. Central banks have sought to increase Norwegian crown and New Zealand dollar allocations, and have also increased their interest in sterling. I don't know whether they'll mention something about BRICS, but that's also something to look forward to. Also, really interesting, gold, which has hit a series of record high prices and is held by 82% of central banks, has moved to the center of the reserve management strategy. I'm not sure what the point of AI with the with gold and the fall of the dollar, how they coincide. I think these are two different topics. Maybe would have made for two different articles. But anyway, they mentioned how banks are using AI for data analysis and back office operations. I don't see how that will change. I don't know. Maybe there's something they're missing. So the second article was also really more interesting, and it had a lot more detail. And it talks about how central banks are dumping treasuries for gold. Pretty much, and raises the question whether gold ETF investors should follow, or they're getting played. Um, a, a summary through this article, and you can already see the importance of the new era that we're living in. So central banks doubled gold purchases to 1,000 tons annually, while 74% plan to cut US Treasury holdings over the next 5 years. This is also a more recent article. This is actually today's article. So 2nd July of 2026. The other one was, I believe, 30th of June. So pretty much this is all happening right now. The current state of global economics since 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement operates on certain pre-assumptions regarding gold, oil, interest rates, and the perceived strength of the US dollar and the geopolitical landscape. You have to remember that at this point, the US was the only remaining power after World War II. And pretty much they set the standard for the global monetary system, and it's what led to the dollar being the reserve currency. But it continues to also say that in retrospect, it appears that the authors of this agreement never conceived of a few things that have really changed the world as we know it today. So the rise of China, digital technology, tens of trillions of dollars in US debt, and a long list of other developments since then. I mean, perhaps the biggest change in this has to be the tens of trillions of dollars in US debt, because the thing is, once the US left the gold standard in 1971, politicians were free to print as much money as possible, and that's what they've done. But the thing is, money, you can't just print money into existence, because there's the other side of the equation, which is money demand, and that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing demand for US treasuries, the US dollar, really top off and start to maybe decline, because no one wants to have an asset which would be worth less in the future. And for the longest time, because the US was, the only global power, they were able to hold on to this advantage, the fact that they can print as many dollars into existence. So now what we're seeing is that for the first time, gold has overtaken US treasuries by value and recently surpassed the euro to become the leading global reserve asset, like we said. Oh yes, so here at least this article does mention the BRICS member countries who are now conducting hundreds of billions of cross-border trade in their own respective currency, which again diminishes the value of the dollar, because there's not as much demand for dollars, because it used to be that you need dollars and you need to route all global trade was routed through New York and so on, because everyone needed dollars in order to hold a safe asset as they conducted international trade. So the national debt for the US is approaching $40 trillion. It's about 39 trillion. It will probably cross the $40 trillion mark in the next coming years, because the US has a deficit of about 1 trillion per year, I think. So now, in response to all of this, it's natural that central banks will also not want to hold on to assets that depreciate. And now gold it used to be sort of like a part of investors' portfolio and central banks' portfolios, but now it might not just be an inflation hedge or something, an asset to hold on during crises, but more of a long-term asset to hold on to because of its store value. So the World Gold Council's 2026 Central Bank Gold Reserve Survey reported that central banks have accumulated an average of 1,000 tons of gold over the past 4 years, up significantly from the 500-ton average of the preceding decade. And that's really what I mentioned. We're now living in a post-COVID world, a new world era, and the notion that we're going to revert back to how the world was before 2020 is unrealistic. So in its latest poll of central banks, the WGC found that 89% of respondents expected global central bank gold reserves to keep rising, while a record 45% said that they expected their own gold reserves to increase over the next 12 months. At the same time, 74% expected lower US dollar holdings within global reserves over the next 5 years. Probably the new normal is gold being the major reserve asset, and other currencies compete against gold, probably as it was. So we will see a multipolar world whereby we have multiple currencies that compete in value, all against gold or other reserve assets that appreciate in value instead of depreciating in value. And it's something that you should also think about in your own portfolio. That's it for me today. That's my daily observation. I hope you enjoyed this. Is there anything that I missed from this video? Please do tell me down in the comments, and like, share, and subscribe.